what came to the headlines today, what's been going around, I'm sure various people have seen in a variety of ways, is there's been the Fight for 15, which has been part of a larger active activation of folks on the ground of refusing to accept things as they are. So with the Fight for 15, we've seen protests across the country from LA to Chicago, New York, Florida. Those are just some of the cities that I saw that were protesting, and I know that there is an effort for one of the protests, and I believe it was Fight for 15, and it may there may be uh, people from other protests that have been being activated, engaging also, but walking down to a fundraiser that Republicans are holding in New York, I believe. And so there should be some interesting stories coming out of there that, depending on what happens there, that might end up snatching some headlines over the debate tonight. But Nis, you noticed that there was also the Fight for 15 wasn't limited to the United States as far as the protests were concerned, right?
No, the Fight for 15, especially concerning McDonald's, has now spread to Europe, where there are protests, strikes, and even sit-ins in France and other European countries. So it looks like the workers' movement, which has been steadily declining in all Western countries over the past 50 years, is now finally starting to unite again and starting to grow again. And seen from a cutthroat capitalist viewpoint, you could say that the corporations that were anti-union were quote-unquote winning, but that they got so austere in their efforts to lower wages and benefits for workers that they inadvertently helped the workers' movement rekindle and rise again, and even join hands across the Atlantic, which is almost without precedence.
Yeah. And which one of the things I found interesting is in some of the places throughout Europe where they were protesting, it's where they actually already have some of the benefits that they are confused to see not existing in America. And so, like, for a lot of them, I think it was a surprise when they were finding out how conditions were in a McDonald's there compared to McDonald's here.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was also particularly interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, that was a discovery I had to go through myself. I mean, I started out by watching the West Wing, and when I was a teenager, and thinking that that was reality. And then, as the world progressed and I grew in age and I started reading more, started finding out that there was this concept called the working poor, which, living in Denmark at that time, I had never heard of or even encountered. And I was quite surprised to find out that it existed in the United States. But even then, I was certain that it was a vast minority. Like, it was not even something that would register. And then, as I progressed in my studies of history, I at the same time also started studying economics, and that's when I started peeling back even more layers of, I wouldn't even call it propaganda, I would just call it a narrative that America tells itself and tells the story and tells the world, and that has simply been told so much that everyone just accepts it, that this is the way it is. And it was really hard to find out that people, that, what was it, 1 in 5 children are born in the most abject poverty you can imagine in the United States. We're talking the kind of poverty where you basically you don't find it other than in third world countries. And to realize that, to see pictures of Flint, to see what has been happening systematically and systemic in Flint, Michigan, in Michigan in general, I couldn't believe my eyes. I felt sick.
Yeah, no, and there was a great piece without endorsing mainstream media too much. I'll point out a good piece when I see it from Lawrence O'Donnell with a representative from a councilman in New York City for that had that particularly was looking at the projects in New York City and how there's 700,000 people living in public housing in New York City, and the housing authority there is basically bigger than the next nine largest housing authorities in the United States combined. And so, yeah, it's one of the things that people don't realize, particularly with New York and New York City, is just the scale at which New York City operates. Because generally, if you talk about like a city mayor or a city official or something, the vast majority of them don't have a whole lot of authority over state affairs or let alone national affairs. But when you're talking about cities like LA or New York, that already puts you on another scale as far as the amount of capital that you're wielding and so on and so forth. And as a such with that, what happens is that New York City, the housing authority, it's huge. It's huge. And so you're talking about billions of dollars. One of the, just to give an idea and to cap it off, said that there's basically $17 billion, billion with a B, worth of underfunding of the housing projects. So that's bricks needing to be replaced, paint, not even just paint, but like walls, restructure, fixing flood damage, all those kinds of things. There's been basically $17 billion worth of neglect in the New York City housing department. And so when you neglect something at a New York City scale, you end up with billions of dollars of necessary improvements. And so like that's a really important thing that needs to be people need to be activated. They talked with Bernie Sanders. None of the other campaigns have returned their request to speak with him. Nobody has actually showed up there at all, though, which is something I would hope Bernie would do, Hillary would do, and everybody should do, is actually go and meet the people and see the conditions that they're living in before you say that we need to cut the funding that we're allocating towards them, because there's real people there and they need to be heard.